All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the Charmed Life podcast. I'm your host. My name is Tricia Carr, and this podcast is all about magic, metaphysics, mysticism, and the unconditional love of the universe. And I am so excited to be here with you. This is the second of doing the podcast actually live as a multi-stream. And so if you're listening on the podcast feed, welcome. And we are actually doing this on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. And you can come and join and chat with me. If I'm solo, well, you can chat with me even if I'm not solo. You can also, make comments and talk to the guests. So my name is Tricia, as I said, and I am an intuitive. I'm a channel. I am a multidimensional medium and a transpersonal hypnotherapist. And I love to have just all of the conversations about everything magical, everything natural, and just living the life that is our birthright, which is, in synchrony, in just the state of miracles and magic and empowerment. So I have a couple of programs I want to tell you about that are available to join right now. And we have easy intuition and meditation. This is your 30-day roadmap to be able to fall in love with your meditation practice, either for the first time or all over again, to connect with your intuition, to be able to bring online that magical life of love and empowerment and compassion for yourself and others. We also go over human design in some fundamental ways, journaling, and divination. So check that out. You can start now, and there are some bonus live group coaching meetings coming up in August. So you can find it on my website, find it in the description, the show notes here. And then I also have the Empowered Empath. Oops, that's a different one. Let me find that one. Link. Empowered Empath. This is also available right now with bonus meetings coming up in August. This is for those people who are highly sensitive, highly empathic, and want to turn that ability and just simply the way that you are made into the healing strength that it is. It's especially recommended for people who have open emotional centers in their human design chart or just identify with that sensitivity. So those are my announcements and my welcomes to you. If you are here live, do please go ahead and let us say hi to you. Talk to us on the chat. And I see Tracy's here. Hi, Tracy. Nice to see you. Well, allow me to introduce my guests then. I have a returning, I think this will be his third time on the podcast, as I recall, Damien Echols, ceremonial magician and author, and also Aaron Osias. Now, they are here to talk to us about the Magnum Opus School of Magick. So let me welcome them on, Damien and Aaron.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, it's
Hello.
good to see you again.
And you too. And nice to meet you, Aaron.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for having us.
I would love to hear all about. I haven't heard anything yet. I like it to be fresh. Would you tell us about wherever you want to start about the Magnum School of Magick and I guess about magic in general, high magic, ceremonial magic, wherever you guys want to start. I want to hear it
all. I guess I'll start just to jump in. The reason we chose the name Magnum Opus for the school is because in Latin it means the great work, and essentially that's what the point of magic is. A lot of times in like the modern world, we think of it as being exclusively something that people use to manifest something that they're some sort of change that they're desiring in themselves or their life or what have you. And yes, that is absolutely part of it, but it's like a sort of a side effect. The main thing we're striving for is completion of the great work. We're striving, we'll never reach perfection in any aspect of ourselves or our lives or anything else, but we're supposed to be continually striving to make steps towards perfecting ourselves even more. And magic is one of the tools that we have for doing that. So that was why we chose the name Magnum Opus. And, just to make it brief, one thing that I always try to explain to people is I have never felt like, it's not even that I've never felt like, it's just the way it is. Honestly, I don't have anything to say about magic that hasn't already been said by someone at some point in the past, and probably far more eloquently than I could ever, articulate it. But a lot of times when you come across these things, especially the more archaically written stuff like the original Golden Dawn material or even the Crowley stuff or what have you, it can be so hard to decipher or make sense of for people who are just coming to this work, that some people will, give up and walk away from it. And they're like, this is just too hard. I'm not going to do this. I'm going back to whatever I was doing before, whatever it is. So my point, my mission has never been necessarily to bring anything new to the table, because it's like the Bible says, there is nothing new under the sun. There is nothing new to bring to the table. What we're trying to do in Magnum Opus is take all of this material and break it down in a way that anyone can understand it. We're essentially trying to give it to people in the ways that we wish that we would have had it when we were first starting out, and hopefully saving a lot of time for people.
It's like you're shortening the path of the initiate, is what it seems like.
Trying to shorten it, but also walking the line of also trying not to water it down.
Of course
we don't
not.
want to,
Yeah.
we don't want to strip anything out of it. We just want to make it more accessible or palatable.
Right. It can't be watered down. I mean, because the interesting thing about the path of the initiate to the master or the high priest or priestess is that it has to be an authentic, genuine transformation.
Yes.
But
and
we
there are
don't
no
also
shortcuts.
There's no shortcuts, but there can be, just removing some of the unnecessary obstacles. Maybe that's the way to think about it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then, when we started doing this I knew from the beginning that this was something that I could not do alone. And Aaron, this is one of those things, like, he has been an incredibly important part of my life for several years. Most of the time when we come across an important event or an important place or an important person in our lives, a lot of times we don't realize it until hindsight. It's very rarely that we come across something or someone and we know immediately, like, this is important. And Aaron was one of those people in my life. I've only ever experienced that thing a very, very small handful of times. But from the moment we met, I knew that he was important to my own development. It was like every single time we met, every single time we connected, it was never just for like chit chat or pointless conversation. Like, every single time that we would get together, I would walk away from meeting with my life headed in a new trajectory. It was almost like he would fill in spots or blanks, or he would say something in our conversations that would, point me in the direction that I needed to go, whatever it was. And part of that is because, my approach to magic, like, I spent 20 years in prison. So I wasn't out here where I had access to things like, orders and lodges and, schools and any of that sort of stuff. Almost everything that I know, I had to learn through trial and error, like figuring out for myself, seeing what worked, what didn't work. Aaron, on the other hand, comes from a background, and I should shut up and let him describe this, but he comes more from a background of that classical, what we think of as a classical magician. He belongs to several different orders, including the Masons and an alchemical lodge. So he fills in the blanks or the spaces with that classical kind of education in this that I didn't have. So together, it's almost like we form a whole person.
Cool. And that's what you're doing with shortening or taking out the gaps or taking out the obstacles. You kind of complete one another too. Well, Aaron, tell us, I would love to hear more about that. What has your journey been like? That's beautiful. And also tell us, if you're watching live, Aaron has a little, tell us what the little icon is that is serving as your.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the plates from the famous alchemical manuscript, the Splendor Solis, which was a Renaissance era alchemical manuscript describing the great work and the creation of the Stone of the Wise, which is different than the Philosopher's Stone. But so my background, as Damien already mentioned, was very formal in a sense, I suppose. I actually began my whole spiritual and alchemical journey or magical journey within the context of Eastern traditions when I was a teenager. And I had met a man who very much changed my life and the trajectory of my life. And he was a Theravada Buddhist monk in the Thai forest tradition. He had actually lived in Thailand for many years, but he taught me Vipassana meditation, Shamatha meditation, and really kind of guided me in Buddhism, Orthodox Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism initially, and also in the Nath Sampradaya of Hindu Tantra, which is a medieval tantric sect in India. It's relatively obscure, but a lot of people might recognize the Agori Babas, the guys who paint themselves with human ash and live on charnel grounds and eat out of a skull. It's very death metal, the way they do things. Not really my cup of tea, but kudos to them. But anyway, I met this guy, and I was with him for several years. We're still friends to this day and talk all the time, but I was kind of under his tutelage. And he recognized that these practices and these traditions weren't necessarily working for me with regard to my own practice. And I didn't feel I was making any kind of substantial progress. And he told me that, listen, I get it. You still love Jesus. You still love the Western stuff. Read the Corpus Hermeticum, which is kind of the Bible, if you will, of the Hermetic tradition. I'd never heard of this. This was when I was about, I think, 19. And so I read it. He sent me a link to a website. Back then, it was very difficult to find a lot of the resources that are widely available today, where you can order books on Amazon and whatnot. This was not the case back then. And I read the Corpus Hermeticum front to back, and I realized, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This speaks to me. This is the tradition I was looking for. And shortly thereafter, I ended up joining the Rosicrucian Order Amor, which is a really wonderful order, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't heavy enough. I was looking for something a little more intense. And eventually I was led to the order to which I still belong, the Sodalitas Rosicrucius in Stockholm, Sweden, or based in Stockholm, Sweden. And that was really where I received not just the education in these things, but rather the transformation that is part and parcel of walking that path. And really, I should explain that order works within the framework and paradigm of the Golden Dawn tradition, but it's essentially like the Golden Dawn on steroids. Whereas the Golden Dawn was very much a theoretical school, and there was very little practical work, ritual work, or spiritual exercises being done.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was very much a preparation for the inner order, the second order. The first order wasn't really practically focused. It was focused on giving all of the members a fairly formal education in Western occultism. And then they would use those tools to kind of create their own way of doing magic in the future once they join the second order. But the SRC kind of turned that on its head. And really from the outset, when you're initiated as a neophyte, it basically, you're doing very heavy adept level work in one respect. Now, of course, you don't have the understanding of an adept in the second order of the Golden Dawn, or in the case of the SRC, the SSA, the second order of our order. But you are meant to begin to do practical work, which will then kind of catalyze and engender that alchemical transformation that's meant to occur within the candidate. So it took me 12 years to get from the neophyte grade all the way to the second order, because it's a very, very intensive process. Whereas the Golden Dawn usually would take a person, the traditional Golden Dawn would take a person 5 or so years. And during that process, I also joined several other orders that were recommended to me. A couple of different Martinist orders. Kind of hopped around that because I don't know how much most people know about Martinism. It's a relatively obscure form of esoteric Christianity, but it is, if you think there were schisms in the Golden Dawn world, the Martinist world makes it look tame. So a lot of people jump from order to order within the Martinist tradition. But I joined that, and I joined the Masons, and I sit on the Supreme Council of a few different orders, and to this day. But in truth, part of the impetus for Magnum Opus was that I personally believe, having belonged to many of these organizations, that this is an outdated mode of spiritual development. And quite often, most orders and organizations within the purview of Western esotericism don't actually emphasize any kind of practical work. They're little more than social clubs or book clubs that get together and put on a kind of costume and talk about things. That's not where transformation comes from. Transformation has to come from praxis or practice. And this is really something that was kind of embedded in my consciousness through working in Eastern systems is that there's so much of an emphasis on practical work that when I entered into Western esotericism, I brought that with me. That was one of the good things about my experience with Eastern religions and traditions. But in the world of Western esotericism and these orders and organizations, that's not often the case. In the case of the SRC, that is certainly the case. All the emphasis is put on practical work, which then brings about and catalyzes that transformation. So really there's a hierarchy of the entire process, and it would look something like this, where theory is at the bottom. You have to understand the theory and the symbol system that you're working within to then adequately practice the magic. So it's or ritual magic, theurgy, or alchemy, or whatever the mode of development is. But really it goes theory, then practice, and the practice informs the process. So theory informs the practice, practice informs the alchemical process of transformation. And after spending, 15 years within all of these organizations, I kind of reached the conclusion, which I still maintain to this day, that these are indeed outdated modes of spiritual development in the 21st century. Most of this stuff that was kept secret, and most of this information and these techniques and rituals that were once secret are no longer secret. They're everywhere. Yeah. And we kind of have to reinvent these things for the time or the era in which we live. And nowadays, with the advent of the internet, we have so much at our fingertips, but it can be very confusing. And this is one thing I hear from a lot of our students all the time, that it's overwhelming because there's so much material out there. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. Damien and I, although we have different backgrounds with these things, we do have a shared interest in distilling these things into the simplest of explanations so that people can easily understand them and approach them, making them more accessible and more approachable without diluting them in any way. So yes. I think that's a very necessary thing, because within the purview of Western occultism and the Western mystery tradition, especially, I would say arguably more than any other tradition, there is an unnecessary amount of obfuscation and obscurity and cryptic language used in one term, which qualifies another symbolic term, which qualifies another symbolic term. And this is ultimately all minutia. So what we really want our students to focus on is the practice, knowing enough theory to supplement the practice and adequately practice these things effectively. But really the focus is on the practice and on their spiritual development and on their magical development as well.
That's amazing. And I have, channeled before that there are no mysteries anymore because everything's available. However, because everything's available, it's sort of burying it in all of the minutia and the overwhelm of the amount of information. Literally, there were mystery schools because you couldn't physically find the books. You couldn't physically find the people, the teachers. And now you can't swing a dead cat without hitting some portion of it. And so it's hidden again, but it's hidden in a different way, in the way it's revealed. It's so fascinating. Yeah. And so you two, again, you kind of complete one another. There's one of my favorite channels. He channels an entity called Bashar. The person is named Daralenka. And he says that they say that the language of manifestation is physical action. If we just keep loading up ourselves with theory, nothing's going to happen, that it has to, and you'll get, you'll just be looping in it, and you actually won't experience growth unless you put it. And that's, we're here being physical beings.
Yes,
indeed.
Do you think 100%? Do you think there are some people who are more, the theory is more of their path, and then maybe it's just as a teacher, or because the reason I ask this is because I teach programs. And, some people just want to be in it to absorb the information. Who knows? Maybe that's just where they are in their path. And sometimes under my charge, don't do the practice. Mm-hmm. So without judgment, I'm just curious. What do you think about that? Do you think that's just maybe someone taking a piece of it and putting it in their life in another way? Or, how do you observe that?
Just my own personal opinion, I would just say I really, I don't know. I think
Yeah, me
I try to the best of my ability. Where I always come back to on things like that is I look at things like that and I may be tempted to judge it sometime, or to
yeah.
even to tell someone, that's really not going to change you, until you actually start doing the work. It's
Yeah.
not going to change you in any way. And I realize, for whatever reason, maybe they're just, in their stage of development or where they are in
Right.
life or whatever, they're just not ready to be doing it yet.
Mhm.
Maybe this is at least getting a toehold in the door for them, like
Yeah.
getting in through a crack. But
Yeah.
ultimately what I always try to do is anytime I find myself thinking about things like that, I always try to just bring myself back to the best of my ability to my practice. And I think,
Mm.
if I just focus on what I'm supposed to be doing, then everything else around me will kind of fall into place and take care of itself. And that
Yeah.
person will get what they need out of it. As long as I'm doing what I need,
It's true.
then in some way or another, hopefully they'll get what they need out of it. Even if it's just because, they are intellectually interested in this stuff.
Right.
People are interested in football and they don't
Mhm.
necessarily want to get out
That's
there on the field and play it, but they still get some enjoyment out of,
Mhm.
I don't know, collecting trading cards or being in a fantasy
Yeah.
football league or reading about players' life stories or what have you. At least they're getting something out of it that's,
Yeah.
making them enjoy life in some way.
And
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, that's the point. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Damien. Of course, we should be tending to our own knitting.
Yeah.
And that's well, I mean, that's, the law of correspondence, as above, so below, and as within,
Mhm.
so without. So if I'm noticing something about some, and again, not from judgment, I'm just, that's out of curiosity. And
Yeah.
I imagine if I sliced parts of my life, in my path, I could see that as well, where I was really wanting to absorb theory before I was doing practice. So
I mean, stuff like that, it used to drive me kind of crazy. Like I would
mhm.
look at myself and like the miraculous things that I had experienced in my life and in myself because of these practices. And then I would be almost, like one of these people that go from door to door, like, have you heard about Jesus? It's like, but I was like that with magic. I was like, look at this stuff. You're not going to believe what this stuff is like, what it does to you. And it was like, I couldn't understand why people didn't just jump on it and, want to automatically start doing it, to experience these miracles in themselves. And then
Yeah.
it drove me crazy a little bit. And I finally just kind of had to divorce myself of it and, say to each their own and just
Mhm.
focus on what I was doing.
Tell us about Magnum Opus, like literally how people, what's the format and how people can, get involved. It's in the, I'm going to put the link up here again. And for
So,
those who are listening, the website is eventcreate.com/e
mhm.
slash Magnum Opus Retreat. And it's in the show notes, but go ahead, Damien, tell us about it.
So it sort of started off as really it sprang to life out of Patreon. I've been
Mhm.
doing Patreon for like 6 years now, and just covering different aspects of magic, telling people, my own personal experiences with basic rituals like the lesser banishing of the pentagram or the middle pillar or, angel invocations, things like that, things that I loved and was passionate about. And we found that people wanted more. They didn't necessarily want all the old archaic hierarchical structures and all of that sort of stuff that come with like orders and lodges and things like that, but they wanted a sense of community. It's
Yeah.
ultimately these practices and the benefits you get from them are going to depend on the work that you yourself are willing to put in, the amount of work.
Mhm.
But people sometimes still want some sort of fellowship
Yeah,
or,
I know. And
some
it's
sort.
great.
Yeah.
There's like this I call it spiritual osmosis, then
Hmm.
the resonance one person is experiencing, it's like it's when there's a connection of those resonances, it's not just times two, it's exponential growth and expansion together. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
So Magnum Opus kind of came to life from that need or that
Mhm.
desire that people had, where they wanted some of the fellowship and they wanted access to a lot of the information that would be available in like orders and lodges and things like that, but didn't necessarily want that kind of structure or anything else, which kind of suit us perfectly, especially me, because I'm very adamant about things like I have zero desire to have labels like teacher or any of that stuff applied to me at all. I
Mhm.
always tell people I'm a guy you're listening to on the internet who wrote some books and is just telling you about his life experiences and hopefully giving you something that's going to, you know, keep you from making a lot of the same mistakes that I did and will save you some time in this process. And that's kind of the way we go about Magnum Opus. And we have it divided into small groups. The groups, we meet once a month, and the groups are no more than 5 to 7 people in each group. And we're gradually working through a curriculum of starting with the elements, going through earth and then air and then water and then fire. And then we're going to work with planetary energies after that and zodiacal energies after that. And we pepper little things in through it, like, you know, divination, or talking about, like, you know, ley lines and sacred spots and, you know, energy, you know, powerful energy locations on earth, things like that, you know, just other stuff that they might find interesting, might want to explore on their own. We throw a little bit of everything out there, because I think what happens is the more of the stuff people are introduced to, the more chance there is eventually that they're going to find the one thing that's going to light them up and be like, that's my thing, whether it's tarot or whether it's energy work. For me, it was always energy work and angel invocations. Those were the two things. We want people to be able to find the thing that's going to light them on fire and send them down their path. And we always start with, you know, whenever we have openings, what we're going to do is we take people all the way through the process. No one can join in the middle, because then they would miss the previous material, and they would, you know, each step builds on each previous step. So after we finish this cycle of people we're working with now, then we'll start over from scratch and let new people join and start over. And usually the way we do things like this, whether it's the retreat or the classes or whatever it is, we always start with the people on Patreon first, just because, you know, they've been the most loyal and supportive and everything else, like for the 6 years that I've been on there. So I always want to make sure they get the first crack at anything. So if you are on there, whenever it's time for new cycles to begin, that's where you'll hear it first. And then if we have spaces left available after that, then we make it available to the general public. But through Patreon is usually the first stop.
I see. And so it's all online.
Yes.
Obviously. Yes.
This will be our first in-person meeting, this retreat that we're doing in October, and it's going to be in Sugarloaf, New York. Aaron, would you actually tell them about, like, the Seligman Center and the history of it and all that? Just because that's really interesting too.
Yeah. So I actually live in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley area, and the location for the retreat is a place called Sugarloaf, New York, which has a 400-year-old history of witchcraft and folk magic and occultism. And the actual space that we're using is a property that used to belong to the Swiss surrealist painter Kurt Seligman, who was a practicing occultist, magician, and alchemist. He actually authored a few books on those subjects, but he was also a very famous and important surrealist painter, and is acknowledged by a lot of art historians as being one of the most important of the early 20th century. So the space that we're using has kind of been charged with his own spiritual practice and his own magical workings. And it's a property with multiple different buildings, and the building that we're using, which is kind of a studio space, if you will, is the actual space in which he performed all of his rituals and did a lot of his alchemical experiments, and as well as his painting. So the grounds in and of themselves are charged with this kind of magical power and energy, but the village itself is also charged with this energy, being a place that has kind of been a hotbed of magical activity for about 400 years. It's also an artisan craft village, so it's made up and has been that way since its inception. It is essentially a village comprised of people like candle makers, soap makers, artists, leather workers, glass blowers, this kind of stuff. It's kind of like a veritable Renaissance fair, but all stationary instead of, you know, moving around the country like Ren fairs do. But it's got that same kind of feel to it. It also has several metaphysical shops. So it's going to be a beautiful retreat. We're both very much looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Is it 1 or 2 days, or sorry, go ahead, Damien.
Oh, I was just going to add in that kind of what we're hoping, you know, like I was describing earlier, like every single time we've ever met in person. It's always led to some sort of transformation
Yeah.
in one or both of our lives. And we're hoping that the same thing happens whenever everybody comes together, that maybe some of that will rub off and it'll inspire them, or, you know, give them new paths to explore.
Whew, I'm getting the chills. I'm getting the spirit chills. That's so awesome. We have a comment here from Salt of Earth says, I've always looked at the Hermetica as the Western version of Advaita. Am I saying it right? Vedanta.
Yeah,
Vedanta.
Advaita Vedanta. Yeah.
I almost got it. Yes, awesome.
Yeah, I would agree, because
Mhm.
both philosophies are fundamentally non-dual in
Mhm.
nature. I would also put, you know, Hermeticism and the Hermetic tradition has a great deal in common with most other esoteric systems of philosophy and practice, whether we're talking about the various branches of Sufism and Islam, or Vajrayana Buddhism, better known as, you know, or Tibetan Buddhism, even though Vajrayana is practiced elsewhere as well. These philosophies that all put a great deal of emphasis on practice and a great deal of emphasis on the idea of non-dualism, in that the subject is the object, the inner is the outer, et cetera, et cetera. The Atman is Brahman. This concept is inherent in Hermetic philosophy. And the whole point of the practice of ritual magic or alchemy or even mysticism is ultimately to bring one to the complete awareness of this inherent truth, that the subject and the object are one, that Atman is Brahman, that the indwelling divinity within mankind is indistinguishable from the ultimate divinity, the transcendent divinity. And this idea is the bedrock of all of these philosophies. So yes, I would completely agree.
Yes, and in Kabbalah, which so many religions and traditions draw upon, including Hermeticism, that creator and creation are on a spectrum and there's no separation. That's another way that I've thought of it. Or in, you know, the holy Om, the primordial tone, that's that frequency that is inseparable from, you know, object and subject are completely inseparable. The unity consciousness, all of the different ways that we
Yes.
explore.
Yes, absolutely. You know, one of the things I've always like tried to explain to people with varying degrees of success is how, like in magic and in some of these other traditions, we don't necessarily look at the phrase God created the world the same way they do in religion. You know, in religion, it's almost like when they say that, it's like this dualistic way of seeing it. You know, like an artist creates an art piece, and at the end of the process, the artist is here and the art piece is there. But when we say God created the world in magic, what we mean is more like God is this infinite source of consciousness and energy that pours itself into the dimensions of time and space and becomes the world. It becomes us. So it's at the end of the process, it's not like there's two separate things. It's like the creator is becoming the creation.
And the creation also is the creator in the sense that we are creators.
Yes.
You know, the creator gave us a literal copy, which is how I interpret the Torah, Old Testament. God made man in his image. God gave man capacity to be creator. And that's what magic's about.
Absolutely. And I think that's what it means when it says we're made in the image of God. Like we are creators, just like the source of creation is creating. 100% agree.
Yeah, I think most, especially evangelical Christianity and a lot of different forms of Christianity, obviously get it wrong when they assume that made in the image and likeness of God means that we literally look like God as physical beings. But if you read Genesis, what I would say correctly, if I may be so bold, but if you read Genesis the way that it was intended to be read, it says very explicitly that after the fall, man put on coats of flesh and skin. Now, most people assume that because, you know, in old 1950s biblical movies, Adam and Eve are depicted as wearing literal animal skins, you know, to cover their nude bodies, that this is what it means. But it seems quite clear that it's implying that man was a spiritual being and then after the fall became physical. And this is part and parcel to the Western esoteric doctrine of the fall. And the many myths that pervade that tradition with regard to the fall, whether it be the fall of Sophia in Gnosticism, the fall as indicated in the Corpus Hermeticum, the fall in Genesis, the shattering of the vessels in Lurianic Kabbalah. All of these myths are indicating this idea that something happened, that we were once spiritual and then we became physical. And I think that this is very important to bear in mind, because a lot of Christian denominations kind of miss the boat on this. Not all of them, but many of them do, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that and we're still not separate. And sometimes it's reinforced to me through spirit, through guides and stuff, that in fact, because spirit creates material. And so that in fact, this is crystallized spirit. It is a deeply spiritual experience, but somehow it comes with a veil, an illusion that we are working through. Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm. This has been so incredible. I could talk to you all forever. What are some ways, but obviously we have the retreat and we have Patreon, and we'll put that all in the description. How would you, either of you, help give someone a tip today how they can start to open up their path of magic? Obviously Damien's books too. That's what
it's still so I always forget those. Like,
you
people
forget
will
you
be
wrote
asking,
books.
I do. Yeah. People will ask about, like, what would you suggest we start reading if we're wanting to get into angel invocation? And I'll start listing off all these people that had an influence on me or that I learned from. And they're like, you remember yours too, right?
Right.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, same thing. So yes, there are. I do have a few books out there that I would appreciate anyone's interest in, on the basic rituals of ceremonial magic, as well as things like angel invocation. But I would also just, that's one of the things I would stress to people is maintaining a balance of studying and practicing.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, a lot of people kind of tip one way or the other. They either do all, like, 95% study and maybe 5% practice. Other people do, like myself, lean more the other way, where you're relying more on practice than on study, and you lose some of the theory and philosophy and stuff if you do that, which may, help deepen your practice. So I would just tell people, maintain a balance of study and practice, and don't necessarily just look at the things that people think are cool. The things that, this is intellectual, or this is like one of the core books of high magic. I have gotten tremendous amount of use out of things that people wouldn't necessarily even think of as being linked to, ceremonial magic, like even books on modern Wicca, things like that. I've gotten tremendous amounts of useful information out of these things that informed and led me to deeper understandings of ceremonial magic. So don't be afraid to step outside the box of what's cool and read things like Silver Raven Wolf. That was one of the big things that I learned from when I was younger.
Yeah. I've been on a tear of books and stories and accounts of near-death experiences or death experiences, which is for me really finding the lifting of that veil, or the blurring of the lines between spirit and physical. And that's what's been feeding me lately, to help to reinforce that in me. And
Yeah, you never know when you're going to come across something like that that's going to, reignite your excitement. When you do practice all the time, it can become boring. It can, if you're doing it day after day, hour after hour, month after month, year after year, you can reach a point where you're kind of jaded with it. But if you keep exploring like that, the joy will come back. You will find something that reignites your excitement again. And it may not be, anything that you've thought of before.
I was with a client who has started to open up a magical practice, and I work with this person therapeutically. So we work in hypnosis, and but a part of all of my work is also when there's messages, and we got this message for this person to do the LBRP, the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, for 33 days. And to kind of work through what might feel like that plateau or that joyless moment, because on day 11 or 12 or 17, it might seem a little rote, but somehow that 33 was going to bring this big expansion. And
yes. I compare it a lot to going to the gym. You're not going to walk into the gym one time and walk out looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not going to happen.
Maybe you won't, but I certainly do.
Oh my gosh, I've done that so many times. Like I've had a really hard workout class and I'm like, am I skinny yet? Because that wasn't enough.
Yes. But it's like the consistency is where you see the results at. When you go on the days when you don't necessarily feel like going, those are the times when you're going to see the most growth, whether it's in your physical body going to the gym or whether it's in your spiritual body doing these practices when you might be bored or whatever. That's when you're going to get the most growth out of it.
And it's all comes down to, I talk about this a lot, discipline. And we must remember that the root word of discipline is disciple. To whom or to what are you a disciple? And turn that back to, that's what discipline is. It's not getting a spanking or being grounded. It's not being punished. It is being a disciple to you, to your spirit, to, your soul.
That makes so much sense. I've never heard that before. I'm going to steal that because
there's nothing new under the sun. I definitely don't own that.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would only add that if we are doing this retreat and if somebody wants to kind of start with a magical practice of some kind, this might be a great foray into ritual magic and more importantly, theurgy, divine magic, in other words. Because even though I think currently we're sold out, we're about to open up capacity to a few more due to overwhelming demand, but that will likely sell out very quickly for the physical retreat. But we are live streaming the entire retreat online, so people can join us and they will receive a link and a recording of the live stream afterwards, but they will also get to partake in all of the lectures, all of the lessons, all the exercises and practices that we'll be doing at this retreat. And the reason I say this is not just to shamelessly plug our retreat, but also because working with the guardian angel is something that they can do for the rest of their lives. And when they open themselves up to that communication, the guardian angel will indeed guide them and will guide them to the path, the spiritual path or the practice that best befits that individual person. So it can be a great way to get started, to kind of, a lot of people think and assume that the guardian angel must be worked with after, the requisite purification that's meant to occur in the nigredo phase of alchemy, to use a symbolic term. In other words, the catharsis phase, the purifying every complex and program within our being so that we can get to the root of our nature. But I would disagree. I think that it's something that should be and is meant to be continuously worked with. Even as a novice, you can begin working with it, open up that channel so that you can communicate clearly with it. And it will indeed guide you and give you revelation and revelatory experiential knowledge of the divine. So I think it's indispensable. And it's also something that they can use for the rest of their lives, these exercises and lessons that we're going to be giving people at the retreat.
Yeah, catalyst and like, a time release capsule
Yeah,
that you'll continue
exactly.
having that delayed reaction, delayed response, and having all of that resource to draw upon. It's a huge, it's a boon, I think. So, well, I'm really excited about it, and you guys will have to come back on and talk about all of it, and maybe report back about how incredible it was. This has been really. I love just talking about it. So thanks guys so much for being on. We have Aaron Osias and Damien Echols. I'd love to have you guys on again sometime soon. And thank you. The Magnum Opus School of Magic, and all of the links are in the description. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having us again. It's been great to talk to you and see you, and hopefully we cross paths again in the near future.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you so much, Tricia.
Yeah. Agreed. Thank you. Well, everyone, that's what we have for this episode. And I just want to remind you that all of the links to everything are in the description. The Magnum Opus School of Magic, Damien's work, and some other things that I mentioned about my work that's coming up. Reminder that we will be live on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. You can join in, you can RSVP in advance. You can find out about it by being on my newsletter and following me on Instagram. Those are the ways you can stay in touch. Please do like, subscribe, subscribe, share, and comment. And if you listen to the podcast version of this, there's something a little extra in there for you too. So thanks for tuning in. I love you, whoever you are.